Welcome back to Double Fries No Slaw. No live this week. So Richie and I are just talking about a recent ESPN update. And Richie, I don't know if this is good news or not. We were talking about it a little bit beforehand, but S&P Plus giving Florida State some love. Florida State comes in as the 36th most talented team. Does that surprise you? Does it surprise you that they're that high? Like literally right out, like if in theory, if this was a preseason poll, which it's not, it's an advanced analytic metric. But in theory, if they were to win week one, they'd probably jump up pretty close to that top 25. Now, it's not a poll. It's not, I'm not telling you they're going to be ranked if they beat Bama, although I think they probably will be. But does that surprise you that they're that close after the most disastrous season that any of us can remember?
Yeah, so I was looking at this, Bill Conley does a great job, I think. The SP Plus has always been my go-to. I know some people may agree or disagree, and that's fine. But just to give the listeners and viewers some context, it's based on one returning production, two recent recruiting, which has been horrible, and three recent history, which, if you're talking very recent history, has been horrible as well.
But to be fair, recent recruiting has been bad for Florida State standards. Still in the top,
Correct.
Still in the top fifth of all of college football, right? Like we've never been outside of the top 25 with
Fair.
so
Fair.
Still not good for us. But when you think about, we're still a more talented roster than 110 other programs out there.
Yes, and that's very fair to make. But yeah, just looking at it, 36th, I think, Florida State should, outside of the top 25 is unacceptable, in my opinion. And that doesn't mean that we're going to finish outside of the top 25. We'll see what happens when the season rolls around. But at the same time, you look at your rivals and where they're ranked at, you have Miami at 12, Florida 14. That's a problem. You are, almost 20 spots behind your biggest rivals. And that's an issue, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, where Florida State is not acceptable. I still think it's probably a little higher than I would have expected. To finish the year last year, I maybe we should have looked that up real quick.
Yeah.
what the actually I don't. I will just look it up real quick since we're talking about it. But yeah, I'm a little surprised with Florida State being that high.
I was as well.
In looking it up real quick, if you're feeling tired, sluggish, or just a little bit off, low testosterone could be the culprit. At Emerald Medical, they are here to help you reclaim your energy with hormone replacement therapy. Use code DFNS for a free consultation to save money on your journey to feeling like you again. They're owned by Chris Hasenauer, a huge college football and Florida State fan. Emerald Medical will offer personalized care that you can trust. You can visit emeraldhrt.com. You can also call them at 772-307-9840. Remember, DFNS is your code to schedule your free consultation and get back to feeling like the real you. So last year, we finished with the 83rd, like we were 83rd in S&P Plus rankings. So in an off season, to jump all the way from 83rd to 36 seems, I don't know, man. You know what this is, Richie. We're gasping for straws or trying to just find signs of life around this program. But I do think that's a significant jump. It maybe brings some optimism, and it doesn't have Connolly ready to say that we're going to go 2-10 again, right? 83rd last year is absurd. You're down there with Northern Illinois, which did beat Notre Dame, Fresno State, Maryland, Buffalo, Mississippi State, North Texas, Michigan State, Virginia, San Jose State, Wake Forest, Colorado State, Old Dominion, Troy. Those are the kind of teams that you're hanging out with at 83rd. A little bit better spot to be at 36. All right, you mentioned this, the rivals. We have talked a ton about the tough 4 games on the schedule, and not that there won't be other games that are tough or other dogfights, and we know we got to go to Raleigh, and Pittsburgh's a team that competes really hard and things like that. But Bama number 2, you mentioned Florida and Miami 12, Florida 14, and Clemson 8.
Yeah.
Anything surprising out of that for you, like for those four, or is that about where you'd expect them to be? I don't think there's anything there. I mean, those were always going to be the toughest games. Now
Yeah.
it's kind of analytically proven that those are the toughest games. Anything surprising there? Best chance at ups. Like, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think Miami, they've put a ton of money into their roster, and you cannot hate on them for that. That's perfectly fine. I'm not sold on them at all. I think they're probably a little overvalued. I do think Florida is probably pretty adequately rated. I think, the most important position in college football is your quarterback, and DJ Lagway is a freaking stud. Like, let's call it what it is. He's phenomenal, and I think if he takes that next step, he you talk about baseball, WAR, wins above replacement. He's probably at least worth one win. So if he stays healthy, I think Florida has a chance to be a very good team next year. So neither of those ones surprised me too much. I think Miami is probably a little overrated, and Florida might be slightly underrated.
Yeah, I like Florida's spot. I think Clemson might be a little undervalued too, just because of what you mentioned with the quarterback. But like, I mean, maybe by like a spot or two.
Yeah.
Like I'm talking 6 or 7. I don't know that they're a top 4 team or anything like that. Yeah, I mean, so much of it will come down to quarterback play for all of these teams, right? Miami, we think is undervalued or is maybe overvalued. But if Beck plays like he did 2 years ago and not last year's Beck, then Miami's going to win a lot of games, you know.
I'm
And if
not
he
betting on
plays,
that. I am not betting on that.
I'm not either. But I didn't think Cam Ward was going to win the Heisman or, be the number 1 overall pick, be in New York and do all those things too.
Fair.
So I'm hoping that
Fair.
I'm right at least one of these 2 years. Yeah, I think that it'd be really good if Florida State could get good quarterback play. That would take them from this 36 range up to around that 25, in my opinion. So you got the 4 tough games, and then you got there's 3 teams that are really close to you. Now you're slightly ahead of them, but I mean, you're talking like marginally. These teams are very close to you. NC State at 42, Virginia Tech at 46, Pitt at 47. You get 2 of those at home, Virginia Tech and Pitt at home. Obviously, the one that's closest to you, you got to go on the road to Raleigh. I mean, I have kind of always thought that these 3 games were coin flips, and I think Connolly thinks the same thing. If you find a way to go 2-1 here, I think you're in really good shape. Now, 2-1 here probably means you're going 7-5 overall. You lose those 4 games that we talked about, the teams being better than you. Obviously, if you steal an upset from somebody, 2-1 here, probably still not acceptable to me, but I mean, you can't lose 2 of these games. You gotta, if you've got 3 coin flips, usually what happens in college football is you win about half your coin flip games. They've got to come out on the positive side of that half. Like they really need to go 3-0, but 2-1 is kind of the worst I think they can do here, and Mike retain his job.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. Just looking at those, where they're ranked, and just fair or not, when it comes to boosters and the fan base and everything that we look at, you know, losing 2 out of 3 to NC State, Virginia Tech, and Pittsburgh, like that's not acceptable. It just is not, and it never should be, and it never will be. And yeah, it should be something that has a high ranking in terms of if Mike Norvell is back next season. And I just think you need to go 3-0 in those games. Like 2-1, okay. If there's a crazy upset, I know at NC State they just announced it's going to be an 8 p.m. game. At what we call the Piss Palace, because they just throw water bottles of urine at our players and whatnot. That's fine, but if you lose that one but win the other 2, that's good. But really, you should go 3-0 in those games, and there's no excuse not to.
Yeah, I think it would be hard for me to predict 3-1 at this point, or 3-0. But you're right. Like you go 2-1 there. I don't think people are going to be very satisfied with how the season went.
No.
They may not be satisfied with the season, even if you do go 3-0 there. But there's got to be a point where you get back to, we talked about this back in like 2021-ish. Like, there's got to be a point where you just get back to beating the teams you're supposed to beat, right? And, how many teams in this country would you pick to beat Alabama? Like a handful, 5 maybe,
10 maybe.
I mean, I think that's high. I'd pick Texas, Ohio State, Georgia. I don't know about Georgia. That'd be, we'll find out this year. But I don't know that I'd go 10. I mean, I could beat them. But like, how many would you bet on like money line right now to beat Bama? I'd say 5 at most.
That's fair. Yeah.
Like just with what they have. So, I mean, that's not a game you're supposed to win anyway, right? And if you do, great. Kind of the same thing with Clemson. I mean, how many teams are you betting on to beat Clemson this year? 5, 6, 7, 8, so you're not one of those teams. Florida, Miami, a few more, but all things considered, you should beat NC State head to head. You should beat Virginia Tech head to head. You should beat Pitt head to head. Now, I mean, and those should not be questions. Those are games that when you have and I know history doesn't impact this season or these rosters, but when you have an overall, like what's FSU against NC State all time? Yeah, it's not good.
At Carter Finley, it's not good.
Overall,
lifetime.
Overall, it's 26-16. Like that's just a team you should beat. Like that's just something you should do. Like that's a team you consistently are better than. And if you go to Virginia Tech, it's even worse. If you go to Pitt, it's even better. Or it's even, these are not these kind of historical like middling level teams are not ones. Florida State's 24-13 all time against Virginia Tech. And then you look at, Pittsburgh, we can do real quick too. Florida State versus Pittsburgh. Actually, they're down 6-5. However, a lot of those wins come in really early for Pitt.
Dan Marino was part of one of those wins. So.
Yeah. Some of those wins, since, well, I guess we've only played them 3 times since the turn of the century. So 2-1 against Pitt. 1 was the really bad loss in 2020. We actually led by 2 scores in that game, and then they scored like 41 straight points. I was like, man, we might actually win this thing.
But you know what? Jameis's first game was at Pittsburgh, and I was there. Yeah. So I'll take that.
So, these are teams you're supposed to beat, and to me, that's where if you can just get back to winning the games you're supposed to, you're probably trending back the right way. All right. So the coin flips, I think there are 4 and then 5 games because the East Texas A&M is not even on here because they're not one of the 134 FBS teams. 136 now. Sorry. I got to change that number in my mind for whenever I talk about how many teams there are. You do play the 136th ranked team. You play the worst team, according to Bill Connolly in S&P Plus. Kent State at 136, Stanford at 88. They don't even have a coach right now. Kind of an interim coach while they figure things out over there. Wake Forest at 81 and Virginia at 79. I know you got to go on the road for 2 of those. This, and then obviously with East Texas A&M, along with Virginia, Wake, Stanford, and Kent State, those have to be auto wins. And I'm not saying they are. I'm not saying you can't, it's impossible for you to lose to any of those teams. I would have said it was impossible for you to lose to some of the teams you lost to last year. But those have to be auto wins. If Mike loses any of those 5, it's really hard for, now football is funny, right? Theoretically, you could lose to a Virginia on a weird Friday night game and upset Miami. And if you do that, they cancel out and you're probably fine. But if I'm looking at it right now, if you lose any of those 5, right, with the extra one, which you certainly don't think they'll lose to East Texas A&M. But if you lose any of those 5, I don't see how he survives. Because if you're not able to beat those 5 teams, how are you beating the 3 coin flips we talked about? How are you beating the rivals? How are you beating the 2 top 10 teams in Bama and Clemson? It is probably a little bit helpful for me in looking at this. Now, S&P Plus does not determine who wins games. Florida State started out, I think, at 13 last year, so we saw how that went. But it is helpful to me to see that UVA, Wake, Stanford, horrible returning production, not very good recruiting, no sense of direction for their program. One of those teams has a coach also on the hot seat in UVA. Wake and Stanford, brand new coaches this year, and then Kent State, literally the worst team in FBS. They can take our title over from last year. I think there will be calls for his job if he's to lose any of these games. Maybe not the Virginia game because it's so early in the year. Maybe how you look against Bama will matter in that. And then you have a chance to rebound the very next week against Miami. I'm not predicting they would if they lost to Virginia, but these 4 are just like, or 5 again with East Texas A&M. These are must wins. And I honestly, like right now, I think they do go 5-0 in these. Like, is that crazy?
Yeah, that's crazy. Because I was so excited last year, TJ, when you and I went over to across the pond, and I was in Scotland, you were in London, then we went to Ireland to watch the game. Especially after that first drive, there was no way Florida State was going to lose that game, and then we leave on a last-second field goal with Georgia Tech beating us. Um, I, they're going to lose one of those games.
You
I
think
just
so?
will. Yeah, I
We
I
should bet
really
on it.
will. And I'm not trying to be negative here, but just based on recent history, and the roster did not get better from last year to this year, in my opinion. That might be another show for another week, but I truly do not believe the roster has improved. I just think that they're going to lose one, maybe more of those games. And if they do, Florida State really binded themselves in when they gave him that 10-year, $80 million contract, when they thought he could be a person that was going to take the Alabama job. I think that makes things a lot more difficult. But one thing I know about Florida State, when people make jokes that, well, Florida State's broke and all this. No, they will find the money to replace a coach if the boosters, not the ones that have their names on their bricks, but the ones that have their names on buildings, if they start speaking up, yeah, they will make a change. And these are all must-win games for Mike Norvell, in my opinion.
Yeah. So I'd still lean towards them winning all of them. I'm a little bit more worried about the coin flips. I do think that the specific scenarios, what's tough is the cross country trip to Stanford and the Friday night against UVA. What does give me some hope against, so looking at each one specifically, UVA, you get kind of 3 weeks to prepare for that. You play Bama, then you play Kent State and East Texas A&M, and you have a bye week in there too. And then you play UVA. You should be in really good shape for that game. Like you should be in good shape. Health wise, you should be in good shape. Like just fatigue wise, you should get a lot of backups in against some really, really, underwhelming opponents. You should even get some you might get some backups in week 1 too. Hopefully not, but you might get backups in all 3. But I do think you'll be in a really good spot for that UVA game. If things don't get weird on a Friday night, I think you win. And then again, I think Stanford is just Wake is the one I'm probably the most confident about just because it is at Doak. And then Stanford, I think is one that if the cross country trip doesn't bother you as bad as it can, I think you'll be in really good shape there. They're a shell of themselves. They lost so many guys to the portal with their coach leaving. I think that you'll have a good shot there too. But game's got to get played, right? So we'll see when it gets here. Looking at this, you feel better, worse, about the same?
I feel about the same. I don't have high hopes for the season. Unfortunately, I wish I could, say something different, but I don't feel worse about it. Like I said, I've always been a big believer in Conley's SP plus rankings. I think 36 is probably fair. It's higher than I expected it to be when they came out just now, and we'll see what happens. But yeah, I'm cautiously optimistic about potentially having a top 25 season.
Yeah, I feel slightly better seeing this. I don't know that I'm changing a prediction. I still think 6-6 or 7-5 is what's happening here. I don't feel great about the top 4 that you play, but I didn't before. So I don't feel any different about that. I maybe feel a little bit better about the bottom 5 and feel a little bit, I agree with. So the one thing I don't want to push back on, because you're right. I don't think from a talent perspective that this roster is better than last year's. I think I'd agree with that. I think from a team chemistry perspective, it could be. We'll see though. We don't know that. Like I'm not telling you that they definitely are, but they're not. I don't think top to bottom they're more talented. I do think they could be a better team this year. That is TBD though. There's no way, nobody on the internet is going to tell you like, oh, they're going to be a better team, or they're going to play harder, or they're not going to make business decisions, or quit in the middle of plays. I think that is to be determined. But I think there's a strong likelihood that they play better as a team despite being not as talented. I do think they are more talented in some areas. I think the offensive line will be better. I think the wide receivers will be better. I think the linebackers will be better. But then I have questions about other positions. Cornerback, are they as good? Defensive line, are they as good? Although, being not as good, but more more effort. How do you balance that? I think they are better in some spots. Quarterback, I think they'll be better. Fingers crossed. Let's hope so. But you're right. Like they're not as talented as they were, but they may play better. So I think that's the great hope. Double Fries, No Slaw. Make sure that you are subscribed. No live this week, but wanted to put some content out. Hopefully enjoy your Sunday. Hopefully the baseball team, which I'm wearing a baseball shirt from Garnet and Gold, gets a win for us here today on Sunday. We don't know what's happened on Saturday because we did this on Saturday morning, but hopefully they won Saturday, they win today, and we get out of this thing. But thank you guys for tuning in. We'll talk to you soon. Go Noles.